Welcome to the Rich Report, a podcast with news and information on the world of big data. Today, my guest is from Zettaset. Once again, we have Brian Christian. He is the CTO of the company. So, Brian, welcome to the show today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Well, it's my pleasure, Brian. I was intrigued by this topic, examining Hadoop as a big data security risk in the enterprise. Why don't you tell me a little bit about the genesis of this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's definitely very interesting to see the traction Hadoop has been receiving, especially with the whole big data ecosystem and everybody kind of jumping onto it. But it's definitely one of those things where I think, the first intended purposes of Hadoop and big data have been kind of appropriated now for kind of the current market. And there are a lot of things inside of Hadoop that was never written for security that I think a lot of people need to be aware of and or at least concerned about, especially if they have to do something with compliances and like HIPAA and GLBA and things of that nature. So one of the things behind that is, Hadoop was actually not written with security in mind. And it's in good company, the fact that TCP/IP and Unix were both not written for security in mind. So it's definitely, kind of tracking along those two success stories as well. But I think, when people kind of start using this and they have to comply with standards like HIPAA, GLBA, or they are storing sensitive information like financial records or healthcare things of that nature, they need to be aware that their data stores may not comply. So even though we have things like mainframe security and we actually have database security, we really do not have distributed security across massive distributed data stores. And that's really what we're talking about when we actually talk about securing big data and Hadoop and the ecosystem, is really kind of a distributed security model.
Sure, sure. So Brian, I brought your slides up. Why don't we go through that and we'll follow it with Q&A.
Okay. So if you look, I think I'm on right here, right after the title slide on slide number 2. So why security for big data? Well, some of the things that I actually just kind of touched upon. And if you actually look at kind of the genesis of Hadoop of itself, it was written, or I will say MapReduce and kind of the concept behind Hadoop, was started by Google. And Google was using it to really kind of store public data, right? They were using it to store public URLs and things of that nature. So security really wasn't a mindset behind the entire architecture of MapReduce and kind of GPFS and which, the HDFS now, kind of on the Hadoop side. So if there was a big data breach, you were stealing public URLs, right? That was kind of the big thing. So there really wasn't a whole lot to comply with. But really, people started having other big data problems, not just, essentially storing the internet, for lack of a better term. So people really started looking at this today, especially with the way, kind of everything's been blowing up around structured and unstructured data and people wanting to kind of get these answers from their data and derive, kind of some sort of information or actionable intelligence from their data. They started realizing that, hey, we're using kind of Hadoop and this big data repository kind of as a bit bucket. So really what has ended up happening is people don't know what kind of data they're storing, right? So there could or could not be a breach, or it could or could not lead to privacy concerns and things of that nature. But, we do know one thing, and everybody will admit it, the community admits it, Hadoop was not written, and the ecosystem was not written with security in mind. So if we're going to use and gain traction with this new technology, this new distributed technology, we're going to have to be sensitive to the concerns of compliancy and personal and private information and things of that nature. So with that said, kind of talking about the genesis and where this goes, kind of on slide number 3 here, security really was an afterthought for Hadoop. And like I said, what they did was recode based upon the Google papers, and there was no security written into any of that. So you kind of got that inherited into this current architecture as well. One of the things was, security never really was a concern, just kind of the where Hadoop came from as the MapReduce function for some earlier projects. And now that what has ended up happening was as it kind of, began to get traction, people started getting a little more concerned, and kind of as an afterthought, the community, we kind of brushed Kerberos on for, some authentication issues and to keep some authentication, on the cluster itself. That was definitely something. It was definitely, it's not the end all be all, but it was definitely something. It at least got it into what I consider the next adoptable state, right? So now that we actually have some sort of authentication on the structure, on the server, on the cluster, and actually have the ability to tie other projects into that, we actually had different things like authorizations, right? So, on the Hadoop file system in and of itself, and we kind of basically used a great example, which was what they did in Unix. So we've got user group other permissions, right? But everything that we have done is very, very basic to date, and it is not extensible like what people are expecting today. And so if you look at all the rules and compliances, security concerns around data, it's written for, 40-year-old relational technology kind of data stores around data masking and what can go out and who can have access to what, fine-grained and encryption and all of this other stuff, and mainframes as well. And that really is not being kind of filtered into this distributed architecture. So even though I think we've got a good start to a currently adoptable state, to get to the next adoptable state, we have to really address kind of these policy concerns and compliance concerns in the actual data store itself. So if we go to slide number 4 here, what is missing from Hadoop? And again, I will point back to everything that is currently in existing data stores for relational technologies or for mainframes. This is what the enterprise is expecting, because the enterprise has had 40 years of fighting with governments and compliances and HIPAA and GLBA, Sarbanes-Oxley, you name it, to basically formulate their current data strategies, right? So really, if you look at what's going to foster the adoption of, and I'll just say the Hadoop ecosystem, because very few people just use Hadoop by itself. They're always using something else like HBase or Hive, or there's other components that make up a good distributed data store. If you're looking at that, really what businesses want, and this is what's going to foster adoption, really what businesses want is minimum impact to what they're doing right now. So essentially, I like to joke that people want a heart transplant, not a facelift. What they really mean by that is that they want to continue with their current business process, what they're currently doing now with compliance, security, everything else, but they want to do it over a larger data store, right? So by minimizing the impact to their current business process and giving them exactly what they need to comply with, their auditors and everything like that, that is really what we need to do. So essentially, I think we're in a great position to, kind of reinvent everything that we've already done for relational data stores to a distributed architecture, right? And this is exactly what we've got to do. And I'm not sure if it's it's definitely a joint approach from the community and from the private sector, because there has been a lot of database security compliance tools that were written, but they're going to fail down in the distributed architecture. I think I'm going to get into a little bit more of why current security technologies just will not scale the types of data we're talking about, the level we're talking about. So essentially what we're missing right now is the ability to basically let enterprises comply with the current standards and policies that they're having to comply with. So just want to kind of go into some of the top risks, kind of on slide 5. Again, I kind of pointed out we did really rely on Kerberos as an authentication system. Here is kind of I don't want to say it's a dirty secret, but it's definitely something to be aware of, and I think everybody knows it. Implementing a lot of clusters today do not implement Kerberos, and the reason being is that it is very difficult. So even though you've got a cluster, I would say probably 90+%, 95+% clusters that are out there don't implement Kerberos because it is a pain. And that's the thing behind security that we really got to be aware of, is that if security is too much of a pain and it's really kind of too hard to implement, people just will not implement it, right? This is why people write down complicated passwords. You know, if it's too hard to remember or too hard to do, people are going to find an easy way around it or just not do it. And this is the thing that we've got to be very aware of. Another big thing that's out there is it's hard to manage all of the security components of the cluster. But keep in mind, you know, while you're using Hadoop as a base and it's kind of the core, you're using other technologies, Hive, HBase, Uzi, you know, you name it. All these different things have their own access control lists. They actually have the ability to be managed independently. They can all tie into the Kerberos framework if you have it implemented for authorization authentication. But if you don't have that, it's really hard too. It's really hard to tie Kerberos into, you know, something else like an Active Directory or an LDAP that you're actually using to manage role-based access. So that's actually kind of a pain as well, is that, you know, you don't want to be managing two independent systems. If you currently have a central, you know, management system like Active Directory, you want to tie that in. It's kind of hard to do that, right? And if we don't actually allow for the comprehensive structure to tie it in. So we manage basic permissions on the cluster, but we don't manage, you know, kind of fine-grained access controls. So really, you know, one of the things that we're lacking here is, you know, the ability to do fine role-based access controls, to do encryption and to do centralized management of that security technologies. So one of the things that I think is really going to drive this is definitely compliance, you know, that we're having to face today, especially around HIPAA, GLBA, Sarbanes-Oxley. And the thing is that the government is requiring more and more data to be stored. So the Affordable Health Care Act, also known as Obamacare, that recently passed, you know, states that all records have to be stored electronically. So you kind of have to appreciate what the government did here overnight, which was expand everybody's data retention needs exponentially, but then basically said, well, we know we kind of just heaped all this data on top of you, but by the way, it's still got to comply with you know, HIPAA and privacy standards. So even though your data needs and retention has exploded, at the end of the day, the auditors don't care if you're storing 5 megabytes or 5 petabytes. The standard is still the same. It has to all be kept secure, right? Well, if you're going to store all this data, you know, you've got to do it in the right and sensible manner, which Hadoop makes absolute sense. You know, but now it's a distributed architecture that lacks the security standards of the actual standard that says that you have to comply with security and privacy. So herein lies that catch-22, right? And we're going to see this actually more. We had GLBA, which was basically HIPAA for the financial sector, but with Frank Dodd coming out, that whole standard is going to change as well. We're now actually beginning to see SEC kind of mandates going after you know, traders on Wall Street, saying, show me all the records that you did for a specific trade for the past 30 days. And the thing is that, you know, a lot of things on Wall Street are using high-frequency trading these days, so they can't store. Those are billions and billions and billions of records, right? Well, if they're not storing them, you know, kind of in a large data store, they're going to have to go back to tape and pull them back off, and they're actually getting penalized now because they can't pull them off of a data store that can be secure, right? So we're beginning to see all these data traps that are popping up left and right. The government is requiring companies to basically store more data, and they just have to comply with the same standards that were written, you know, 20 years ago. I think it came out in 94, 96, I can't remember. But, you know, they're having to comply with those standards. So these are the things that that people are really having to look at, and look at how they're going to address this in the future, because it's only going to get worse, right? And more data storage requirements are going to have to be addressed. So existing security solutions are really not designed, or security solutions are not designed for Hadoop environments. And this is the one I really want to talk about, because at the end of the day, all of the security solutions, especially around privacy, audit compliance, all of that has been written with relational data stores in mind. So we were talking about maybe gigabytes of data, maybe terabytes of data, but it's not going to scale to the level that it needs to, into the multi-terabyte range, the hundreds of terabytes, the petabyte range. It basically falls down when it comes to levels of that scale. The second thing is that all of these technologies were not written with a distributed security model in mind. In other words, they were written for the database, right? They were never written for the cluster, which consists of, hundreds, if not thousands, of machines. So how are you going to address things like failover inside of the cluster? How are you going to fail over securely, right? You can't just have one key management store if that thing dies, and then, you've got a bunch of data that's unencrypted. You can't, kind of keep them in parallel, because if your key management store is on a rack and it dies, and another one kicks on, but then the original one kicks on as well, you got a split brain scenario where you're writing keys to two separate, independent data sources. So there's a lot of just architectural distributed problems that are around this as well. And that's the thing, is that when you look at all the vendors at RSA, how many are actually planning to address kind of big data security going forward? And this is the thing that I think is very scary, because if you believe some of the quotes out there, I think by Aberdeen, that says 80% of the Fortune 500 have a Hadoop store, less than 20% have it in production. There's a reason for that, and that's because they can't secure it, which means that they can't trust it, which means they're not going to rely on it, right? But they really love the fascination behind big data. They really love the problems that it does solve. And it does. It solves a lot of problems. And it helps to give them insight into their data as well. I like to say that there's really three things that people are looking at, looking to big data for, and that is to either make money, save money, or to give them some sort of edge over their competition. Or it helps to address a problem like the Healthcare Affordability Act, where now you have to retain everything has to be electronic, and you have to retain all the data. So it answers a lot of it solves a lot of problems, but it also creates a lot of problems at the same time. And I think like any new technology, it will get addressed. But I think right now there's a lot of security vendors that are not looking at securing big data, especially in a distributed architecture. With that said, I think there is actually some companies out there that are addressing, kind of big data analytics and how do you basically, security analytics based on big data, and how would you basically use big data to identify these types of security analytics. I question those companies as well, because at the end of the day, how can you build an analytics platform for security when big data itself has not been secured? So I think these are all kind of this great, kind of pool of questions that will be addressed. But I think, it'll be interesting, especially to see what the security community does this year. So I want to go to slide number 8 here. How do we actually address the Hadoop security problem? And there is no silver bullet kind of for this by any means. And this is the thing that I think it's going to be a kind of a conjunction of both the Hadoop community, the open source community, developing great technology, and the security, kind of private industry, listening to enterprises and what they're concerned with and what they're dealing with. especially around their audit and compliance needs. And I think that's really what's going to help to drive this. But we need to basically mimic or replicate or copy or follow, what, the past 40 years of data security and compliance has been wrapped around. And, I think that's where we need to start. So one of the things that we've been doing at Zettaset is actually looking at fine-grained role-based access control, a little bit more than just Kerberos authentication and tying it into Active Directory and providing user group other permissions on the actual HDFS. So we've really, I don't want to say, that we've solved it 100%, but we've definitely addressed it farther than anybody else has had to do. So, what we've got out there is definitely leaps and bounds about what you're going to find either in the open source or actually in the security community itself. And that's because we're really taking a distributed, approach to this and looking at it in a distributed model. With that said, I think the next thing that we need to accomplish is how are we going to do encryption, and how are we going to do encryption without impacting performance, or basically, bringing the whole thing to its knees, or making sure that it can fail over securely and things of that nature. Also, I'd like to see some sort of secure framework, which everything can tie into besides Kerberos. I think Kerberos is great. I think Kerberos does fall down when it comes to the complexity of it. So I'd like to actually see some sort of framework around easy manageability that people can tie into, whether that's open source or private industry security source. I think it would be great. I think it would go a long way. Again, I think the key to answering this is you have to provide the level of functionality that people have today or enterprises have today with minimal impact on their business. And I think that is going to be the secret to solving all of it. And the complexity and the problem behind doing it is we're not doing it in a singleized kind of database market. We're doing it in a distributed architecture market, which has its own level of complexity. So I think you'll see, just like you see in any technology, where we basically stand on the shoulders of people that came before us, and do it for the next level. And the next level I see right now is distributed computing and big data Hadoop storage as well.
Well, thanks for that, Brian. It just seems to me you've really done a good job of describing the problem and some steps that Zettaset has made some progress. Is this really represent opportunity, especially from a business side of things?
Absolutely. I think, there's opportunity to be gained here from both the enterprise that's trying to employ big data, again, trying to answer, how do I make more money? How do I save money? Or how do I get an edge over my competition? And for the security community that really has been addressing those needs around standard data stores like Oracle and relational technologies. I see this as the new frontier, not to use a cliche, but it really is the new frontier. It's distributed security. And this is definitely, I think, where the security industry is going to have to start playing.
And then, Brian, I'm curious if, are they more worried about internal threats than external here? I mean, is it a matter of, boy, if I can get access, I've got the keys to the kingdom?
Absolutely. It's one of those things where, if you really break down what distributed security is, it's really two sides. One, we are talking about securing the cluster itself physically. We're talking about securing it computationally, hardening all the nodes inside of the cluster, turning off all unnecessary services, making everything's patched, architectural, SSL. We have all that. But really the other side of that is data security, right? And this is exactly where, to your point, if you do have the keys of the kingdom and you are internal, the amount of data that you could steal is enormous now, right? Because no longer can you just compromise a database, but if you compromise the entire data store, and the data store is made up of petabytes of data, then you're going to see we joke about, kind of the credit card breaches of the 20th century where 1 million or 2 million credit card numbers were stolen. Way to that hits hundreds of billions of credit card numbers. That is what you're going to see, especially in these types of large data stores.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was talking to Garth Gibson over at Carnegie Mellon about this, and he said you have to really look at Hadoop as something that turns raw information into assets, corporate assets.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want those laying around where they can be easily pilfered or lost or broken, right? You need to
Mm-hmm.
secure that, and that sounds like the track you're on.
Yeah, I think it's the one we've been progressing on, and I have to admit, being a security individual, especially with my last company, Spy Dynamics, security has always been in the blood, and then when we actually crossed it with distributed architecture, this was definitely kind of the perfect storm for my personal interest and my passion. So, I'm excited, honestly, just from a computer guy to address these problems. I think it's something that, was never really done in a distributed architecture period, whether that was HPC or anything else, just because security, impacted performance, right? And I think there's ways of going about this smartly and intelligently that you can secure big data security, you can secure distributed security without impacting performance significantly, to actually make it a usable solution for the enterprise. And I think that's the goal that we're shooting for, and I think we're getting there rapidly.
Well, terrific. Well, Brian, I want to thank you once again for coming on the show today.
Hey, anytime. Thank you so much for having me again.
You bet, you bet. Okay, folks, that's it for the Rich Report. Stay tuned for more news and information on the world of big data.